Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Thank you for listening, whether it's on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or via podcast. Later in the show, we're going to speak with Dr. Genevieve Gunther. She is an author and climate activist. Her latest book is titled The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda, and How to Fight It. She caught my attention a couple of days ago when I'm skimming through the Twitter X platform, like a lot of folks have over the last few days, in the wake of the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and just the political cycle in general. Anyway, I came across a tweet of hers and just went down the rabbit hole. This tweet: the disasters in North Carolina and Nepal, the repeated heat over 110 degrees in California and Arizona, these are symptoms of a planetary cancer that will get worse and worse, potentially metastasizing out of control until we stop using coal, oil, and methane gas. Remember, later is too late. It is on that note where we begin today. Joe Kovac Jr., Tia Mitchell at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, really painting a beautiful picture in words in this story that I'll include in today's show notes at ronchoatl.com. President Joe Biden touring storm damage in southwest Georgia. They wrote, upon viewing some of the wreckage in Lowndes County on Thursday afternoon, President Joe Biden's motorcade ventured west toward the town of Hahira and the pecan grove of farmer Buck Polk, where trees were flattened. The route there also consisted of a roadside scene that looked like a planet of dead trees. Forests of shredded limbs and branches littered the road for miles. At Polk's farm, standing at a podium in front of a John Deere tractor, the president told locals, "You've been through hell. And I want you to know I see you, I hear you, I grieve with you, and I promise you I have your back." Here is some of that address from President Joe Biden yesterday.
Folks, a week ago, Hurricane Helene became one of the strongest hurricanes ever hit Florida and this part of Georgia. Roofs ripped off the buildings. Massive trees crashed into power lines, setting out loss of heat, electricity. Flooding wiped out homes. We were just down Florida, see homes that were, just wiped away. That's the entire island gone. Families, they lost everything, including loved ones, including family members. And I know it isn't the first time. Just over a year ago, a major hurricane hit these same communities. A couple months ago, Hurricane Debbie did the same thing. Three in a row. You've been through hell. 3 in a row. And I want you to know, I see you, I hear you, I grieve with you, and I promise you we have your back. We're going to stay until you're restored. Earlier today, I was briefed by Florida officials on the damage, and I met with first responders who've been working non-stop to provide aid and support to survivors. I did a walking tour of Keaton Beach with a bipartisan group of officials to survey what a 15-foot surge, some places went as high as 3 stories, does to a coastal community. Then I came here to Georgia to meet all of you to see firsthand how you're doing as well, because we're really in this together. We're separate states, but we're the United States of America. I want to thank Governor Kemp, who I spoke with again this morning. And Senator Warnock is behind me, Senator Austin Scott, Representative Sanford Bishop, old friends. In moments like this, it's time to put politics aside. Again, it's not one state versus other, it's the United States. There's no Democrats or Republicans out here. It's what we do to make sure we restore the economy. Only Americans are here. I've been committed to being president for all America. In fact, all the major bills we've gotten passed, from over $1 trillion bill relating to infrastructure to $368 billion bill on dealing with climate, a whole range of bills we got passed. Well, guess what? The fact of the matter is, more money from those bills have been spent in red states than in blue states. Right. More in red states than blue states. As I said, it didn't matter where it was or who needed help. not based on party, who needed help. And I mean it sincerely. She can check it out. Our job is to help as many people as we can. As many as we can. And also, by the way, when you do that, I hope we begin to break down this rabid partisanship that exists. I mean that sincerely. There's no rationale for it. There's no rationale for it. And so, it doesn't matter who we help, it's who's needed help. And look, we're going to help as many people as we can. That's why, days before the storm hit, I pre-positioned extensive resources on the ground throughout the Southeast, extensively. First responders, search and rescue teams, food, water, ambulances. Before Helene had made landfall, I also immediately improved emergency declarations your governor and others asked for. And so all of us could focus on the first responders and standing up emergency operations centers. That was the focus. And yesterday, I approved Governor Kemp's request for a federal government to cover 100% of the cost for debris removal and emergency protective measures for 3 months, 100%. I must tell you, your senator had a little bit to do with that when he called me beforehand. But all kidding aside, we're doing the same for Florida as well as we're doing for North Carolina. Folks, this is going to pay for the urgent work to clear the mud, remove the downed trees, provide temporary housing. And on top of this, the Department of Agriculture, and I have with me the Secretary of Agriculture today, is on the ground to support farmers, ranchers, and small businesses impacted by this storm. And FEMA teams are literally knocking on doors to register folks so they can receive assistance to buy what they urgently need, from prescription drugs if they lost everything. Well, for example, I was just down in Florida. One home, what people really worry the most about is not just losing their home, it's they lose everything that mattered to them. They move, they lose that picture of their mom and their dad when they were kids. They look, I mean, all the things are personal. They look at family jewelry, the ring that was the engagement ring, all those things. And I was with one rescuer who said there was a young family who had their entire home was lifted up and taken out into basically what we'd call a bayou. It's not a bayou, but a flat space out in the middle of a marsh. They went out there, they cut a road through with their vehicles. That they got out there, they went in, and all they wanted to do was just receive, get back what they lost. They lost their home, but they were even more concerned about the personal things that mattered so much to the families. And so, this is going to pay, as I said, this 100% to clear all the things that need to be cleared. And on top of this, the Department of Agriculture is on the ground supporting ranchers, farmers, and small businesses. And as I said, the FEMA teams are knocking on doors to register people so they can receive assistance. Think of all the people out there throughout the country here in the Southeast that they need prescriptions filled. They don't have the money. They've lost everything. They don't have any way to fulfill their prescription. Or baby formula. They can't afford it. They don't know where to get it, how to get it. And so we're registering folks so they can receive this assistance and buy urgently needed things they badly need. This direct assistance is now being delivered. It's being delivered now, directly, with more to come. But folks, this entire project is going to cost billions of dollars. Not tens of thousands, not millions, not a billion, billions of dollars. Because it goes through so many states. You know, and Congress has an obligation to me, it seems to me, to ensure the states have the resources they need. Let me close with this. I'm standing here beside Buck, the owner of this pecan farm. This afternoon, we got a chance to talk a little bit, and he showed me what he lost, talked about what he lost, and his dad. Acres of orchards wiped out, trees uprooted, debris everywhere. Decades of progress gone in a single instant. But through it all, Buck hadn't lost hope. In fact, he reminds me of another Georgia farmer who just turned 100 years old. President Jimmy Carter once said, "Tremendous progress can be made if we persevere through difficult challenges." This is a difficult challenge we're facing. This storm is extremely difficult for our country. To all the first responders, police officers, and volunteers who ran toward danger, to all the survivors and families who had their lives and livelihoods torn apart, we got a lot of work ahead of us. I was with him, as I said, I was down in Florida today, and a gentleman walked up and handed me a small pamphlet, a book that his wife had just written about how they lost their son. Their son died last time out in their home. You know, a lot of people in real trouble. But we want you to know, as I said, we see you, we're with you, and we're going to preserve and persevere to get through all of this. Because, folks, this is the United States of America. We're not 50, we're the United States of America. There's not a damn thing we can't get done, nothing beyond our capacity when we work together and put politics aside.
Just a fascinating situation. Obviously, Joe Biden not running for re-election in a capacity to do the work that he needs to do without the filter of running for office. Meanwhile, Patricia Murphy at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the Twitter X platform reporting yesterday that Governor Brian Kemp and Donald Trump, who Brian Kemp had to correct without directly doing so just days ago, will appear together for the first time since 2020 when they speak to the press. That'll be today in Evans, Georgia. It's a suburban enclave just outside of Augusta. One of dozens of Georgia communities devastated by Hurricane Helene. It won't be a campaign event, but as Patricia Murphy, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports, we'll be watching carefully. Donald Trump, for his part, has been fundraising through GoFundMe, and he's also coordinated with Franklin Graham's organization, Samaritan's Purse. I'm familiar with that from my ex-father-in-law's church activities. Good organization. And taking needed supplies, water, gas, trucks, et cetera, and so on to affected communities as well. He, however, is running for office. So a little bit of it. And when I mentioned Governor Kemp correcting Donald Trump has been claiming that when governors in affected states were calling the White House, Joe Biden was asleep. Governor Kemp, in that delicate situation that he's in, trying to stay in Trump's good graces while still not just lying to the media, refuted that by stating that no, he and President Biden had spoken quite often. Anyway, there's so much politics involved that we sort of lose track of the central piece of this, and that is climate and climate change. The author of the book, The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It, is Dr. Genevieve Gunther. We'll have her on in just a few. Thank you for listening to The Ron Show on America One Radio, AmericaOneRadio.com, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. You can follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms. That would be at Ron Show ATL, Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. I also invite you to follow Dr. Genevieve Gunther, my guest. She, of course, is all over social media as well. You can just find her at Dr. Vive, V-I-V-E, on the Twitter X platform. I would also invite you to follow the social media platform of her organization, End Climate Science. And that is...
It's End Climate Silence.
Silence, you're right. I talk for a living. She's right. But it's End, C-L-I-M-T, Science. Silence. I'm doing it again. Anyway, Dr. Genevieve Gunther joins us. I talk for a living. Thank you for joining the Ron Show this morning.
Everybody does it. I don't know what it is about this name of this org. I'm going to have to change it because, literally everybody does it.
Well, we don't want to end climate science.
No, absolutely not. Could you imagine? That would be a total disaster.
Well, and listen, we're already behind the eight ball as it is. Your book, The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It. Thank you for joining the conversation. Yours is a voice that needs to be heard, I believe, a lot more. And I'm not even sure how I came across your tweet the other night that talked about, later is too late. But I mean, it was kind of goosebump and spine tingling. I don't know if it was maybe in the throes of the vice presidential debate. Climate change was actually a discussion for once in a key moment. And that's sort of alarming because it doesn't happen enough.
That's right. I mean, that's the goal of my org, End Climate Silence, is to push the news media to cover climate change with the accuracy and the urgency that the problem deserves. All too often, they'll be reporting on a story that's clearly a climate story, like a story about extreme weather, but they won't actually connect the dots to climate change, even when they describe what the scientists say are the ways that climate change like made this particular weather event more intense or, happen more frequently or something like that.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's on that note that I'm following Into Climate Silence on the Twitter X platform, and this tweet on October 2nd. Scientists estimate that climate change increased Hurricane Helene's rainfall by up to 50% in North Carolina and made the event up to 20 times more likely.
Right.
That's the first I'm hearing of that.
That's right. So much education, so much information gets circulated by advocates on social media, but the broad swath of the American electorate, like most of us, don't hear that stuff because it's not necessarily being reported by the broadcast news, by the print news, by the legacy media. And that's really unfortunate because the vast majority of us learn everything we know about climate change from the news media, like not from our high schools, not from college, but from the news media. So yeah, it's a huge problem. I mean, there are lots of issues, but this is one that I think really lies at the center of how, bad actors, people who represent fossil fuel interests, have been able to lie about what's actually happening to our planet and how bad it's going to be if we don't stop using coal, oil, and gas, and kind of get away with it because nobody's fact checking them. And most of us don't really know what the real deal is because we haven't heard that much about it. So, media coverage is a really key point or a key element of, any real issue that you have to kind of decide in a democracy, right? People need to be well informed so that they can make their judgments about who they want to have represent them in, Washington and in their state houses, et cetera.
It was on that note, actually, you mentioned media complicity. Another tweet that I spotted because I follow Media Matters for America. They're on the show quite often. They're actually keeping track of how much climate change is mentioned by media. Their tweet on the 1st, broadcast and cable news shows aired a combined 22 hours and 35 minutes of coverage across 468 segments about Hurricane Helene, and only 15 segments even mentioned climate change. It's a literal drop in a huge bucket.
Exactly. No, exactly. And so this is why, activists and advocates are trying to put pressure on journalists to, it's not like they need to write big stories about climate change if that's not their beat. But if they're reporting a story that's clearly a climate change story, they need to mention it, because if you don't talk about the elephant in the room, when the elephant is sort of standing right there, swinging its trunk back and forth, you're, kind of perpetuating a lie, right? You're pretending the elephant isn't there when he's right there. So it's really important. And it's, it's not up to journalists also. Of course, their editorial boards and even their executive suites need to come on board with this. But very often, the executive suites are taking money from oil and gas companies for advertising. So, they're kind of complicit and they have conflicts of interest. And it's not entirely clear that even well-educated journalists who aren't necessarily science journalists or, nature journalists or whatever, even really understand what's happening to the planet and how serious it's going to be, already for people who live in the South, for example, and for really everybody within just quite a few decades if we don't stop using coal, oil, and gas as soon as humanly possible.
I'm glad you said that, because I think in some realms, like whatever the Valdosta daily newspaper is, if they still have one, I have a hard time imagining that daily newspaper has some sort of an editor who's filtering things out because of an agenda, driven by oil and gas. But I do think that there are journalists who cover things like this, who are used to covering devastation or, just something local even that impacts locally. And they just don't know the science to even want to delve into the conversation or take up the column inches to have a conversation about something that they just don't know enough about.
Totally. And let's be clear, covering climate change exposes you to lots of abuse on social media from, readers who have been, steeped in the Fox News misinformation ecosystem, from paid advocates that are paid by fossil fuel disinformation groups, and like literally their job is to sort of go into community groups on Facebook, or monitor the news media and just sort of work the phones and try to get people to feel like it's not worth their time and their energy to cover this thing that they don't even really feel confident covering to begin with. So it's a real problem. And then just sort of on a broader level, it's like we've built this world on the backs of fossil fuels, right? And oil and gas companies have seemed like kind of the cornerstone of the American economy for quite a long time. And it's kind of hard to get your head around the idea that actually these people are really bad actors who have known since the late 60s, early 70s, what coal, oil, and gas was going to do. Like there's this quote that I bring into the book from Shell, an internal memo written by Shell scientists that sort of outlaid all the ways that climate change would destroy ecosystems and how that would impact economies and migration and all these things. The culminating sentence of that paragraph was, civilization could prove a fragile thing.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So my guest today is Dr. Genevieve Gunther. She is head of the organization. I'll go and give you credit for this because you launched this program, End Climate Silence, and authored the book, The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It. We were talking about how for decades the fossil fuel industry has known about the potential impacts of continued use of fossil fuels on the planet and what it would do to climate. And the more you talked about that, the more I kept sort of paralleling it to what we've already been through as a society, and that was the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry knew for decades the impacts of continued tobacco usage on an individual's, physiology and health ramifications, and yet held on to that information, knowing that it would, kind of be a Debbie Downer for profits. And do you see the parallels as well?
Oh, totally. So, not only did they hold on to the information that they had that smoking way increased your risk for cancer and heart attacks and all this stuff, and not only did they hold on to the information that they knew that, their products caused global heating, which causes climate change, which puts civilization at risk, they then went out and did all of this PR, all of this disinformation, all of the all of this propaganda, essentially, to try, in the case of tobacco, to create doubt about the science, and in the case of climate change, to create doubt about whether climate change was real or not. So it's not just that they were sort of like sitting on research and not talking about it. They literally went out to spread the propaganda that would create the belief that what they knew was real wasn't real. So this to me is sort of like, it's pretty egregious. It's like practically a crime because if you know that people are going to be dying of cancer from smoking at a higher rate and you sort of don't care about whether they're going to die or not, just so that you can keep doing your business, to me, that seems like a criminal infraction. And then multiply that by, millions.
Right. With
climate change, to me, it just seems like these people are bad, right? But they've also been represented as sort of this great American industry. So it's hard for people to sort of get their head around that actually, no, we can't trust what these people say, and we shouldn't be supporting them by spreading their propaganda and their lies. So, but I should say that this strategy of trying to get people to believe that climate change wasn't real is no longer sort of the main thing that they're doing. Yes, Donald Trump will say that climate change is a hoax, but mostly the Republican Party and certainly the oil and gas companies are now spreading a different kind of propaganda.
Really?
So now the propaganda is that, yes, climate change is real. We see it all around us, but we can keep using coal, oil, and gas and still deal with climate change anyway. So they spread this propaganda through these words, which you alluded to at the beginning of the show, which kind of dominate the language of climate politics. And together those words make a kind of narrative, which is sort of the mainstream consensus about climate change. And that narrative goes like this. Yes, climate change is real, but calling it dangerous or, a threat to civilization is just alarmist. And it's going to cost too much to take climate action. And, human flourishing relies on money. It relies on economic growth. And that economic growth relies on fossil fuels. So we should keep using them and deal with climate change by investing in innovation and increasing our resilience. And anyway, America and the West shouldn't do anything about the climate crisis while emissions are still rising in, quote, India and China.
Yeah, India and China. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So this is the narrative that actually kind of shapes this real unity around the idea that we should keep using fossil fuels. So on the right wing, you hear that, we need to drill, baby, drill. Mm-hmm. But then on the center left and in the mainstream of democratic politics, you hear something more ambivalent. You hear what Governor Walz said in his debate with J.D. Vance, which is we can do both. We can support clean energy to try to drive down demand for fossil fuels, but we can keep sort of investing in continued fossil fuel production and, consumption. But let me be really, really clear at this point.
All right.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is this sort of international body of scientists that meet to produce these reports about the state of the science every 7 years. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, said in their latest report, which synthesizes all this research in 2023, they said that we already have, let me put it this way. They said that we already have enough fossil fuels to push us over a relatively safe amount of global heating. The existing fossil fuels that have already been built, that we're already using, are projected to emit the total carbon budget for halting warming at 2 degrees Celsius. So that means that we already can't use some of the coal, oil, and gas that already exists because we're also going to be emitting greenhouse gases through agriculture, through the creation of medical plastics, through wildfires, all that stuff. So we actually already have too many fossil fuels to halt global heating at 2 degrees Celsius. And that doesn't sound like a big number, but you have to put a lot of energy into the climate system just to heat an entire planet up that much. I mean, right now we've heated about 1.3 degrees Celsius, and we're already seeing unprecedented effects. Helene dumped 40 trillion gallons of water on the South.
Wow.
These communities are destroyed.
Yep.
They're gutted. And there was new research that came out yesterday, in fact, that showed that, the death toll from hurricanes like this actually continues to rise for up to 20 to 25 years after such a catastrophe, because there are all of these unintended consequences and knockoff effects. But these deaths can be traced back to the hurricane. So the hundreds of people who are going to be directly killed by this hurricane is just the sort of beginning of people who are going to die from health effects or from no longer having money to get health care because they had to rebuild their house or, whatever it is. So yes. And then of course, there's also the danger that if we heat up our planet, over 2 degrees Celsius, certainly we're going to set off these tipping points that'll flip our various systems into different states. So this is super, super serious. And the people who are trying to prevent us from getting fossil fuels out of our systems, and they are blocking every attempt that governments and businesses make to sort of divert resources into the development of clean energy and the transformation of our systems. These people are doing everything they can to try to block saving our world for our children just so they can make money for like a few more decades. And like, to me, this is just unimaginable. There's like one world where we know that life exists in the universe, and they're willing to trash it just to make and lie to everybody about it, just to make money for a few more years. It's like
it's like taking a gamble.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. It's like
it's not even a gamble because we know what's going to happen.
No, you're right. 1,000%. I liken it to what I call the flat earther effect.
Yes.
Where like, someone who claims that the earth is flat because they see nothing but flat land in front of them, it's only what they see immediately near them. They don't see the scope, the bigger picture, because there's so much more to see. The damage and the devastation, the southeastern United States, reliably red country for the most part, all they're focused on is the here and now, and wanting to, receive whatever, financial benefit they can from the federal government to get their lives back in order. I'm seeing tons of memes, not one more cent for Ukraine or this and that and the other until this, is returned to form. But also the big picture is, okay, the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law that was passed in the last 4 years addresses a lot of this, or seeks to address a lot of this, and everybody that you elected to Congress voted against it. They don't see, they don't connect the dots. And I'm just wondering, when will the dots get connected? Will that light in the attic ever come on? And I just don't, it's so frustrating. Again, I'm a son of the South. And so I've lived around folks of this mindset most of my life. And I'd like to think I know how to talk with them. But like, I was talking to my dad just the other day. My dad is, he's not a political person. He doesn't, get politically motivated very much. But he was telling me he was concerned about, like, we're going to lose our homeowners insurance. I feel like they're going to do to us what they did to Florida. And he lives outside Augusta, Georgia. And I said, Dad, that is even the for-profit industry in the insurance, game telling you this is not a game that they want to play anymore. And climate has a lot to do with it. And climate change has a lot to do with it.
It has everything to do with it. Yeah. That's it. That's why the insurance industry is collapsing in Florida, is collapsing in California, is, on the verge of collapsing in the Deep South, where this hurricane, devastated these communities. And like less than 1% of people, I think, in the affected areas had flood insurance, right? So it's like, my heart is just absolutely breaking for these people, but look, it's like, if you live, really, Rupert Murdoch is one of these people who history is going to see as, right up there with, I don't know, Genghis Khan. Yeah. And I don't want to
No, Joseph Goebbels or Baghdad Bob. Yeah,
Thank you. I wasn't going to go there, but I'm so glad you did. He is the Joseph Goebbels of our era, because he has basically created this entire media ecosystem that just spreads lies. It's sort of like is built on real concerns that people have, and like a real sense of independence, a history of not liking what the federal government has done to their communities, a kind of traditionalism about family and religion or whatever. And so it's built on all those values. And then on top of that, it's just spread so many lies. And so, our politics are so broken in this country and so polarized because, it's not that we're like different people, like our hearts are the same, but like one group is getting one set of facts and the other group is getting a whole set of lies, or like, different facts with half of it left out. So, this is, to me, what's breaking our politics. And in terms of like Ukraine, we have plenty of money in this country to rebuild the communities that have just been devastated by Hurricane Helene and continue to prevent this fossil fuel authoritarian would-be Hitler from invading Ukraine and then slowly invading the rest of Europe, which is what he said that he wants to do, and causing World War III. Like, we can't let that happen, It's bad for America. So anyway.
Well, I actually chime in when I see some friends that'll share that meme that I'm talking about. And I'm like, Vladimir Putin thanks you for your support, because that's exactly. I feel like that came right out of a Russian troll farm with the little American handheld flag.
100%.
Yeah, the little American flag in the floodwater. I mean, you can't tell me that that's not AI generated or something that came right out of a Russian troll farm.
You know it. You absolutely know it.
Yeah. I also hear a lot of this after a mass shooting. Now's not the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now's not the time to have this discussion. And I think I'm hearing a lot of this as well in the aftermath of Helene. Now's not the time to talk about climate change.
Yeah. No, this is exactly the time to talk about climate change. They don't want us to talk about climate change because they don't want people to connect the dots between what just happened in Helene and what these people are doing to our children, what they're doing to the communities that have been devastated by this hurricane, and what they're doing to our children. And there's no separation between talking about climate change and like helping these people out. I will say, however, the climate movement has done a really bad job of, mutual aid and community assistance and whatever. And very often it's these sort of, religious groups or other groups that spread climate denial that are actually in these communities trying to help people out,
Yeah.
So like, I do feel like the climate movement needs to put its money a little bit more where its mouth is, but it doesn't have much money is the other issue.
Right.
It's like everyone's like, these deniers are like, oh, these scientists are spreading this so that they can get these big grants from the government and they're so rich. Nobody has money. Like nobody's even making $100,000 a year. Like people are like, scientists don't make a lot of money, and the climate movement is like trying to save the world on, a shoestring because like we're begging philanthropists to, dole out $1,000 here and there. Right. So it's like we're not very well resourced, whereas our enemies have just, mountains of cash, essentially. So that's part of it too, I would admit, but we still should be doing a better job. But the point is, right now is the time to connect devastation to climate change, because that's what we're seeing. To not talk about it would be a lie. Like silence is a kind of lie. In the same way, like right after a mass shooting, it's like, these boys who go into their schools with these semi-automatic weapons are troubled, but there are troubled men all over the world.
Right.
Sometimes it's just the guns. And like, we need to reckon with that when we are dealing with our grief about these children who are innocently slaughtered, just because some people don't, like people who don't want to have common sense gun regulations, to my mind, have somehow made peace with themselves that some children are going to die on a regular basis so that they can have a semi-automatic weapon. And to me, that's not like a deal that I would want to make with myself. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night,
Yeah. We're with Dr. Genevieve Gunther. She is author of the book, The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It. Going to take a quick break and come back and wrap up this conversation. Very necessary conversation on The Ron Show here on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, and of course, thank you if you listen via podcast, wherever you podcast. Stand by. Final few minutes with Dr. Genevieve Gunther on The Ron Show, and thank you so much for giving me so much time today. She has been a trooper sitting here waiting while I get my segments shipped out so that we're on the air as close to actually.
Oh, it's so good to talk to you. It's no big deal whatsoever. What are you talking about?
So,
it's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. The Language of Climate Politics is the book, Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It. By the way, it's available on Amazon. You can get it from Barnes & Nobles. It's at a lot of bookshops. It's on Kindle and Audible as well. That's a fantastic thing because I don't like to read. We were talking off the air, though, and a little bit on the air in the last segment about folks connecting the dots. And the thing that came to mind in between these segments was immigration. Folks don't really understand that immigration is impacted by climate change as well. Folks who are impacted in North Carolina may have to move to states like Kentucky or Virginia. And at those borders, there's not going to, be a Border Patrol agent to stop them and make them go through all these rigors to move. Does the light bulb come on? I mean, do folks get it then?
Well, I mean, the reason there's been a surge at the border is because climate change is already making it impossible for people in Central and South America very often to grow food on their farms, and they can't support their families, and they literally can't survive, right? Yeah. And so nobody's going to be walking for days with toddlers across dangerous territory, risking their life, like doing what I think is actually kind of weirdly heroic to try to get to America in order to survive, unless they absolutely have to. And it's a tragedy because America is the country that has put the most greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
Bingo.
And basically we are,
it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility.
100%. And if you're a Christian, I'm sorry, if you're a Christian, your religion requires you to take that responsibility for the unhoused stranger. I mean, Jesus was like born in a manger because his parents were immigrants. So yes, so it's a huge thing. But like the thing that we can do, is connect those dots. As you said, like connect the dots from immigration to climate change, connect the dots from Helene to climate change, connect the dots from fossil fuels to our bills going up. So this is the thing, like once we get fossil fuels out of our economy, everyone will pay less for electricity, for heating, for transportation, and for healthcare, because like 8 million people a year die from fossil fuel pollution every year on this planet. And, economists at Duke University have penciled out or even penned out, calculated how much Americans would save on net in the economy if we got fossil fuels out. And it's like an unimaginable amount of money that would actually pay for the transition to net zero and have billions left over. Plus, the net new economy is going to create hundreds of thousands, indeed millions of jobs. So the Investment Reduction Act, that was a Freudian slip. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, has sent like money into red states.
Yep.
So in Georgia, there are all these new factories in communities that used to be manufacturing communities that were decimated by globalization. And now there's all this new investment into clean energy manufacturing in Georgia, in North Carolina, like in all of these communities that have suffered from Republican and Democratic, but like policies over the past decades, but can be repaired now.
Yeah.
So when Trump says that he's going to try to repeal IRA, repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, he's actually going against the desires of the governors, like Governor Kemp, of these states who want this investment to go into their communities, who want businesses to invest in their constituents, who want this job creation. And, by the way, China is like way ahead of us on this. They have been trying to become the clean energy manufacturing powerhouse since 2010. And guess what? They've succeeded. So they're going to dominate the economy of the 21st century. And they're going to end up being the first country to achieve net zero because they have these incredibly comprehensive climate policies in place. And America is going to be left behind if we don't get these crazy climate deniers out of office and stand up and say, no, we want America to lead the nation, lead the world into the new economy of the 21st century that's going to allow our kids to have a livable future. So what the book does, it offers you messages that you can use with people, not with skeptics, not with your uncle who just watches Fox News all day, but with, people who are already concerned about climate change, people who are even alarmed about climate change, but who don't really know or don't believe that we have to stop using fossil fuels. But the messages in the book are messages that you can use when you're talking to those people to help them see that we have to phase out fossil fuels, and doing so will bring enormous economic benefits quite aside from being the only thing that's going to ensure that we have a livable planet. And, focus group polling that we did after I created these messages shows that they do raise support for phasing out fossil fuels by up to 10 points among Democrats and Republicans who are already concerned or alarmed about climate change. So the book it's a deep read, but it's also gives you actionable, practical tips that you can take away with you moving forward.
Well, you wrote a handbook then, a guidebook, and I appreciate that. And listen, again, this is happening in mostly red states. The southeastern United States is MAGA country, and they are reeling from this, and now is the time, as you said. Dr. Genevieve Gunther, author of the book, The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda, and How to Fix It. Thank you so much for joining the Ron Show today. Much necessary conversation.
Ron, thank you for having me on. It was great.
In today's show notes, I'll give you Dr. Gunther's website, also at DocVive, V-I-V-E, on the Twitter X platform, End Climate Silence, at End CLMT Silence. Show notes, as always, at RonShowATL.com. Have yourself a safe weekend. We will see you Monday. Thank you for listening.